I get it. You've probably spent a good chunk of an afternoon scrolling through spec sheets, watching videos where someone shouts i9-14900, no problem, and wondering if that's really the kind of power you need or just a marketing hype that'll end up gathering dust in a drawer. You don't want to drop your hard-earned money on a workstation that sounds amazing on paper but ends up being a frustrating square peg in a round hole for the kind of work you actually do. So before you click buy, let's break down what the Lenovo ThinkStation P3 Tiny really brings to a typical professional's desk, and whether that tiny box can actually fit into your workflow without turning your day into a series of compromises. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest thing about this machine is size. The P3 Tiny measures just a few inches on each side. Think a large external hard drive, and that makes it a perfect candidate for anyone who's constantly moving between conference rooms, hot desks, or even home office setups where space is at a premium. If you've ever tried to jam a traditional tower into a cramped cubicle, you know the pain of tripping over cables and needing a whole second monitor just to see the power button. The P3 Tiny solves that by mounting directly behind a monitor or even tucking under a standing desk without any fuss. For a freelance graphic designer who needs a solid workstation but hates the visual clutter, that form factor is a real advantage. Now, let's talk about the heart of the machine, the Intel Core i9-14900 vPro. On paper, it's a 14-core, 28-thread beast designed for heavy multitasking, and in real-world use you'll notice that it handles multiple design applications like Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator running side-by-side without the dreaded slowdown you get with older CPUs. In my own testing scenario, running a 4K video render in DaVinci Resolve while simultaneously compiling code in Visual Studio, the system kept the fan noise low enough that it didn't become an office distraction, which is something you don't always get with high-performance desktops. The i9-14900's vPro branding also means you have built-in remote management capabilities, which is a subtle but huge win for IT departments that need to push updates or troubleshoot machines without physically being at the desk. Memory is another practical consideration. The P3 Tiny ships with 32 GB of DDR4 RAM, which is plenty for most creative workflows, data analysis tasks, and even moderate virtualization. I've seen users run a Windows 11 Pro VM alongside their main OS to test software builds, and the system didn't stutter when swapping memory between the two. That said, the RAM isn't user upgradable after the seal is broken, so if you think you'll need more than 32 GB down the line, you should consider a custom configuration at purchase. It's a hidden trade-off. The tiny chassis really limits the upgrade path, and you'll have to plan your future needs ahead of time. Storage-wise, the unit comes with an M.2 NVMe SSD, which makes boot times lightning fast and reduces load times in large project files. For a CAD engineer who routinely opens multi-gigabyte assemblies, that speed feels like a genuine productivity boost. However, the tiny chassis only supports a single 2.5-inch drive bay, so if you're a photographer who relies on a massive external RAID array, you'll still need a separate enclosure. That's not a deal-breaker, but it's a practical element to keep in mind. Connectivity on the front of the P3 Tiny is surprisingly robust for its size. You get a handful of USB-C ports that support both data and power delivery, a couple of USB-A 3.2 ports for legacy peripherals, and a HDMI 2.1 output that can drive a 4K monitor at 60 Hz without any extra adapters. I've also tested the Ethernet port on a 1 gigabit per second network and found no throttling during large file transfers, helpful if you're pulling massive datasets from a server. The downside, however, is the lack of a dedicated graphics card. Lenovo markets this as a professional-grade machine, and while the integrated graphics are fine for 2D design work or light video editing, they won't satisfy someone needing GPU-accelerated rendering for 3D modeling or high-end gaming. If your workload relies heavily on CUDA cores or intensive GPU compute, you'll need to look elsewhere. Who should consider buying this? First, anyone whose primary need is a compact, quiet workstation that can handle typical office productivity, 2D design, and moderate video editing. Freelancers, small agencies, and remote workers will love the ability to slip the unit into a laptop bag and set up in a coffee shop with a single monitor hookup. Additionally, IT administrators in mid-sized companies will appreciate the vPro remote management features, especially when deploying multiple units across a campus. The P3 Tiny also makes sense for educators who want a powerful machine for classroom demos without a massive footprint. Who should skip it? If your daily grind revolves around heavy 3D rendering, AI model training, or any workflow that leans on a discrete GPU, the P3 Tiny will feel underpowered despite its impressive CPU. Also,